Greetings, everyone. We are excited to come to you today as we are discussing a very pertinent topic as we begin school for those who've already started and also for those who are yet to start. Obviously, we are taking consideration a lot of things that are of interest. Today's topic centers around trends in school safety, how districts are creating safer learning environments. I am extremely excited to have this group of esteemed educators who will be introduced and will introduce themselves very shortly. And so, as we begin, we definitely want to thank EdWeb for this opportunity to host all of you today. And we look forward to a very worthwhile conversation. So I just want to introduce myself. I'm Roderick Sams. I serve as the Chief Development Officer for CENTEGIX. I'll talk a little bit about CENTEGIX a little bit later, but the bottom line is we are very much interested and work very closely with districts in the area of school safety. It is the work that we do. It is the work that we are proud of, and the partnerships we've developed are truly aligned to create safer learning environments, teaching and learning environments throughout the country. A little bit about myself. I started as an educator. I spent 20 years of my career starting as a paraprofessional or teacher assistant, all the way up to a high school principal, and made the transition to the business side of education about 15 years ago. And of course, I've worked for several companies. I landed with CENTEGIX about 2.5 years ago, and I'm really excited about the work that we're doing as we work with each of the panelists that you will hear from, and we work with their districts or their previous districts, and excited about the partnerships that we've developed. As I mentioned before, just a little bit about CENTEGIX. We want to make sure that you understand who we are as a company. Our safety platform really focuses on three main areas. Emergency response. We have a wearable alert system known as Crisis Alert. It also includes a dynamic mapping system we call Safety Blueprint. And of course, we have a visitor management component that also includes the ability to manage location of visitors on your campuses. So these are all pieces of our safety platform. And again, this is kind of the stage where we will be talking about how our district leaders that are serving as panelists will be probably given some insight in how their districts have leveraged these tools and resources. So as we begin, I wanted to kind of give some information about our 2024 School Safety Trends Report. CENTEGIX publishes this report on an annual basis, and we use information from our users, but also from data points from other sources. And so as we start thinking about the findings of our report, there are several things that we've learned that shows the connection between safety and school performance, safety and academic success, safety and teacher retention and recruitment, and things of that nature. So here's some information that is pretty profound in my opinion. 18 days of instructional time is potentially lost due to classroom disruptions every year, as reported by teachers. That's a significant amount of instruction. That's 10% of your instructional year. So just to give some context, the badge being utilized by teachers and staff is more valuable because of the discretionary nature of it, and it's easily accessible. First responders getting correct location rapidly. Obviously, time is a critical factor. Saving seconds saves lives, which is a paramount piece of who we are and what we do. 99% of the alerts are for day-to-day things, right? Things like classroom disruptions or medical emergencies, et cetera. And then, of course, half of the safety incidences on a campus happen outside of the classroom. We're talking about hallways, cafeterias. We're talking about parking lots and playgrounds. So having something that can work anywhere on a campus is critical as it relates to safety and making sure that everyone feels supported and can get that help when they need it. So now we're going to move into the introduction of our speakers, and we're going to start with Dr. Jara. Dr. Jara, if you will just simply introduce yourself to our audience and share what you would like to as far as introducing yourself.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Rocky. And well, good afternoon, good morning here. Those of you still in the West Coast, first of all, just thank you for the opportunity to share the great work that happened in the Clark County School District. I'm honored to be with my colleagues here on this panel, but phenomenal educational leaders. Clark County, fifth largest district in the country, close to 9,000 square miles, 365 school buildings. Unfortunately, we'll talk a little bit more about how we came across CENTEGIX, but it was an opportunity for us and a response to an emergency that took place. CENTEGIX did a great job in their response, but, our board priority, my priority, our priority in the school system was always, children and staff are not safe in school or don't feel safe. They can't learn. And it was for me, and for us in the Clark County School District is something that CENTEGIX became a great partner to really help us lead the work. So I'll just be brief and short and chime in as needed. But again, as I said, I'm just honored to be able to share as those of you who are still and are getting ready for a great start. Some of you started school now, going to start Monday or in a week. Have a great year because our children in America and our schools are counting on you to lead. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jara. Mr. Ptacek.
Hello, Steve Ptacek, Superintendent in Jacksonville, Illinois, Jacksonville School District 117. We're entering our third year with CENTEGIX, and I've got a lot of positive things to say about it. We are a large school for Illinois standards, geographic region at 222 square miles with 10 different buildings with students. Of course, that doesn't compare to Las Vegas and Clark County, but it's still for a lot of districts. We have to cover a lot of ground. Our police agencies have to cover a lot of ground, and anything that we can do to get quick information about any threats, my community and my staff immediately jumped on board with. So I just look forward to talking more about what a positive benefit this has been for our community and for our school district.
Thank you, Mr. Ptacek, so much. And Dr. Enfield.
Hello, everybody. I am Susan Enfield. I just recently left my position as the superintendent for the Washoe County School District, which is located in Reno, Nevada, the second largest district after Clark County, where my friend Dr. Jara was superintendent, served. Prior to that, I served as the superintendent for 10 years in Highline Public Schools just outside Seattle, and prior to that in Seattle Public Schools itself. I think as many of us experienced over the last couple of years coming back into full person learning after the pandemic, we saw the impacts of that time away on not just our children and our young people, but our adults as well. And we knew that we had to take extra measures to ensure that our schools not only were safe, but that our staff and our students and our visitors in the schools felt safe. And so not long after Clark County partnered with CENTEGIX, Washoe County made the same decision to give teachers that sense of empowerment in terms of their own safety, and to signal to our staff, to our students, to our families and community that safety was paramount for us.
Thank you all very much. I think it's really important as we go into the questions portion of our presentation and our webinar. Obviously, we are excited and thrilled to engage in this conversation, and it is very much designed to get a lot of information from their individual experiences, but also see if there's information that is across the board that highlights the value of the focus on safety, which is ultimately what we're talking about today, and how that has impact outside of just the safety realm into other parts of what superintendents and district leaders and school leaders are responsible for supporting. And of course, we'll talk more about how it's had those kinds of impacts as we go through the question and answer portion of our presentation. So we're going to start with question number one. Obviously, as superintendents, one of the major initiatives that you and your boards undertake is the development and implementation of a strategic plan. And, that strategic plan guides a lot of your work. It guides a lot of your decisions and choices and how your districts move forward. And so the initial question obviously centers around what role does safety play, or did it play, in your district strategic plan, and how did it inform the priorities of your district regarding safety? I'm going to start with Dr. Enfield, and then, of course, we will go through each panelist for their response.
Yeah, so both in Washoe and Highline, I had the opportunity to work with staff and community to develop a strategic plan for the district. And in both of those cases, safety and belonging featured quite prominently. I will say that we learned a powerful lesson during my time in Highline when initially back in 2012, we set a goal in our strategic plan to eliminate out-of-school suspensions and expulsions, except when critical for staff and student safety. And at the time, it was a pretty bold move. Not many districts around the country were naming it that plainly. But what I learned and what we learned over the course of the 4 years of that plan was that we got it wrong. The goal wasn't to eliminate out-of-school suspensions and expulsions. That was a measure. The goal, it was a metric rather, the goal was to create schools where students and staff alike thrived, where they felt safe, where they felt respected, where they felt they belonged, where every student had at least one trusted adult in that building that they could go to. And so in the second iteration of that plan, we changed the goal to talk about schools where children and adults thrive and feel safe and respected. And the number of suspension and expulsions merely became one of the metrics in measuring that.
Dr. Jara, your insight in regards to the Clark County strategic plan, and of course, how those priorities came as a result of the establishment of that plan.
Yeah, no, and to follow, I think what Dr. Enfield mentioned a little bit, it was a key component of our strategic plan here in the Clark County School District. One of the things that we really looked at as a whole was not just expulsion suspension. I had as big as we were, in like some of the urban districts, I had a police department that reported directly to me, so the chief of police. But it was also more than just what was happening around schools and the challenge that we're facing with children and adults, but then also the emergency management, as you know, Rocky, from our partnership. It's how do you respond to crisis? How do you respond to everything? It's really what we named it was really around a safe learning and working environment, because now it just captures everything, not just a fight, weapons. It brings, is it the safety measures that you're addressing in schools? Kids getting hurt. We were measuring quite a bit of information now, because then it also helped us prioritize our budget, right? I mean, the board was really important. Now we had to make adjustments after COVID, as we mentioned earlier, when kids came back to face, right? The impact of the social emotional learning, what happened for children and adults. So we had to make some shift and some reallocation of resources because it was just more than just the violent acts. It was what we called, in the mental health crisis that was just across the world, and that impacted our schools, and then the violence that was coming onto our campuses. We'll talk a little bit about it, but it was a priority for us. I go back to, kids and staff don't feel safe, they're not going to learn, and teachers can't teach.
Mr. Ptacek, so in Jacksonville, obviously slightly different environment, but of course, the strategic plan that you guys focused on and developed obviously still has to have safety as a priority. Can you talk a little bit about what role does safety play for you?
Well, you've got two different aspects with safety, and I'm going to just really tag on to what Dr. Enfield was saying, is that you can directly talk about safety precautions and safety measures, and then you can talk about the indirect aspects, such as relationship building and coaching with students that hopefully will have a positive impact on the school environment. we've been in a situation where we've renovated thorough renovations, 5 of our 10 buildings and facilities. And we've addressed both of those in the strategic planning for each of those facilities. One, to make a physically safe and secure environment, but also due to simple things such as making sure your doorways are wider so you don't get students bumping against each other, removing all the things that cause some tension that we possibly have some control over, have been important in development of each of those facilities. But when you get into lighting, you get into all the other aspects that give the school value to your students and to your staff, we've seen a positive impact on student behavior and a more focused academic environment. So our strategic plan has been more about the indirect aspects that will then impact student safety than just a direct application. But we are always looking for things that we know we can add in to help with the physical safety of the school. And you're sponsoring one of the ones that we knew was a great addition to help us at a very good cost level to really have a major impact in the school.
Thank you. So obviously, it kind of leads into our next question, which kind of centers around something I think Dr. Jara alluded to, and I think all of you in some way did, and that is the trends that your districts have seen in regards to student behavior and even medical incidences. And a lot of districts have talked about how that's changed post-COVID and post return to school from the pandemic. I'm going to start with Dr. Jara on this one. Can you talk about some of those that you saw in Clark County, and what were some of the challenges that your district faced as a result of that?
Yeah, and I'll start. And I'll start with when we were going in an attempt to open schools. We were shut down for almost a year. Actually, it was close to a year, March, maybe by 2 weeks. And I remember one day, just sitting and sitting in the office, and it was reported that we had another student commit suicide, and that's kind of where I said we need to look at numbers and looking at data to try to figure out a way to get our children back in our schools. With I used to say, I need to see the white in their eyes, because you can see the screens, and if we all remember that terrible time, right? So it was a way for us to start putting our eyes on children. We had seen a significant increase in suicides in Las Vegas. I believe in a total of 18 months, we lost close to 25 children that took their lives. Don't want to say it was COVID, but it was higher than normal, right? So I said to our Department of Health and said, it's more than just because remember, we were talking about a COVID slide, right? Oh, the academic slide. Nobody was talking about the mental health. Nobody was talking about the everything else that was going on. So to me, when we brought them all back, and Rocky, I told you this story, and if I can, to my colleagues, I had a teacher that said to me one day, "Superintendent, these kids, we gotta provide more, because it's like sending them home to live with dad for 2 weeks, but it's been a year now. Mom has to put them back in order," right? That was what this teacher said to me, and it's like you're sending home for the weekend. Now you got to put order back in place, right? Because they were not used to just the being in school for that. So we put systems in place around mental health. We use universal screeners. We use a lot of different things for kids to be able to respond. But it was what we were learning in the classroom, and then the violence that was coming onto our campus across the country, right? We had so much of that violence that was coming on, not only kids, but then also adults. And I think that with the increase in fights, the disrespect of police, even our police officers. So everything that was just happening out in our community that we saw play out on TV, where folks not getting on, getting kicked out of airplanes and all these different things, that was happening in our schools. And I think all of that was really putting a lot of pressure onto our campuses that we had to deal with.
Yeah, that's a common theme that I've heard across the country, and of course, Ms. Ptacek, as I go to you, obviously your district one of the things that attracted, that CENTEGIX was attractive for you was the ability to respond to incidences like this. Can you talk a little bit about the trends you saw?
Well, one of the things, I'm going to buck the trend a little bit, that everybody likes to talk about the impact that COVID and the students being at home had. We're one of the rare districts that we never left. We stayed in school the entire time. And our community established a priority to keep our kids in school, primarily for the socio-emotional impact it would have by them going home. Of course, in Illinois, we were from March to the end of the year of 2020, we had to be out, but we all had the option to come back in the next year, and we were one of the few that did. But we're still seeing this dramatic increase in extreme behaviors that are having an impact on the school environment and having effect on individual students and overall on the school atmosphere. So therefore, COVID might have had an indirect impact even with our students being in school, but no matter who you are, I don't think we're not touched by this growing trend in society for a level of disrespect for authority. And we have to really set that as a priority of how to address it.
Dr. Enfield, I've heard you talk very specifically around this topic. Can you share your experiences as it relates to the situation that you most recently experienced, whether it's in Washoe or Highline, and then how those challenges were met?
Sure. So I will amplify what my colleagues here have said around the fact that nobody came out of the pandemic unscathed. Some were impacted in more severe ways than other, but everybody was impacted in some way. And so I don't believe that any of us working in schools were surprised to see an increase in behaviors and an inability in some cases to readjust to being in community with other human beings after being shut down. Steve, I will say, having been in the Seattle area during the pandemic, I was in a part of the country where from March of 2020 until September of 2021, I'd estimate that roughly 10,000 of my 18,000 students in Highline did not set foot in a school building. And I think that history will tell that, everyone made the best decisions they could make with the information they had. I think those of us who stayed closed that long got it wrong. I think history will bear that out. So I applaud you. I'm sure it took tremendous effort to get your school open. But I think the impact,
just
though,
a little
Rocky,
bit.
that I want to talk about is we see behaviors in our schools, maybe at levels that are higher than other times. It's not just the pandemic. Schools are microcosms of the larger society around them. And, I spoke at a youth mental health summit a year ago in Reno. And I said to the audience, have any of you watched Congress lately? Have you seen a school board meeting? We are modeling for our children that which we want them to emulate and aspire to. They're doing
Yes.
it. So I think that there's a role that we all play in creating I think, Dr. Jara's point around, having healthy, respectful discourse so that our students understand how to disagree without it getting violent. But I think that there's more to it. It's not just the pandemic. I think it's this larger sort of space that we're in right now that our children are watching and learning from, and our teachers and staff in our school buildings are in the position to have to mediate and mitigate that. And so as superintendents, and though I'm not a sitting superintendent now, I was for 13 years, and I am now working with and supporting and coaching those who are in that seat. As superintendents, we have the responsibility for in making any investment that we can to ensure that our students and staff feel safe in our schools. But I think that what we see now is reflective of a larger societal issue that we have to talk about.
Yeah, that has a tendency to get lost as we have these conversations around some of the experiences that are more recent in schools and the uptick in some of the challenges that are being faced and how it's played out in all kinds of other, it created other challenges. And we'll get to probably some of those things specifically. But I think it's important to remember that all the points that have been raised here, everyone was challenged. Everyone has been challenged over the last several years. And it's really how we overcome is going to make the difference in how our students and our teachers and others in our schools are going to be positively impacted moving forward. So many of you, all of you have talked very specifically around, different things that you've invested in. And obviously, CENTEGIX has played a role in each of your districts. So, specifically around the investments that have been made, with your districts, was there an incident or a policy or legislation that prompted the need to partner, whether it's with CENTEGIX or any other entity that supports the safety efforts of your district? Steve, I'm going to start with you on that one. And so can you just kind of talk a little bit about what made you look at the investments your district made and why did it happen in the way that it did for your district?
I can be very fortunate in saying it was not any one major incident in our school district that prompted the necessity to talk about increasing our safety measures. But I do think that the construction of the multiple buildings we did led a lot to that, because we needed to know we had the opportunity to make differences while the buildings were being designed. So when you do talk about bulletproof films and maybe bollards or things to stop cars from driving into buildings, there's all these different things you can add in. And then they start talking about some things that the price point's just extremely high compared to what you think is actually going to be the impact. We had to start looking at things that we knew were going to be very cost efficient but impactful. And for once again, bulletproof films on windows and on doors. It reduces anxiety in the community and your staff. They're expensive, but it's a one-time expense. So we decided to go that route, and then we started looking at personal notification systems. We explored many of them on phones, but we felt that those are clunky. They were tough to get to. Also, the question with the unions of whether or not you were going to provide the cell phones for them if that was a part of your safety system. So that explored us to look, and we ended up going with CENTEGIX. But we're very fortunate that it was a national trend really driven by an anxiety amongst our community and staff that made us have to look at it.
So Susan, same question, right? Obviously, as you were, superintendent in both districts, Highline and Washoe, safety investments, were top of mind for you as superintendent. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with those investments? And then, of course, was there a specific thing or a series of things that prompted the need to move in this direction?
I think I'll build on what Steve said. I think it in our case was both looking at trends and perceptions. So while we were seeing a trend in more escalated incidents, and the way that I describe it is this: I think pre-pandemic, an altercation that would begin with maybe name calling and a shove, in some cases now begins with a punch in the face. It's not about escalating behaviors, it's about escalated behaviors from the get-go, for all of the reasons that I think we touched on, that the isolation and impact of the pandemic had. So I think that we saw examples of behaviors that were starting out more escalated. And even though the numbers themselves, the numbers of incidents, year over year were not significantly higher, the perception among teachers and staff and even families in the community was that we were seeing a lot more of these incidents. And so as a leader, you have to hear and listen to what your team and your community, is saying. And we knew that we needed to make some additional investments to ensure the safety of our students and staff. Obviously, We were making tremendous investments in prevention, in all of the ways that districts do. But we also needed to equip our teachers and staff with something that would make them feel tangibly safer and give them control over the safety of them and the students in their classroom or in whatever setting that staff member was. And so making the investment in CENTEGIX made sense because we were equipping teachers with the power, teachers and staff, let me be clear, with the power to take control in a situation that felt out of control or that was potentially spiraling out of control. And it was a very, very public, I think in many ways, it was a very public values statement that we made as leadership in the system to say, we hear you, your safety is paramount to us, and this is what we're going to do. And I think that while on its face, this would seem obvious why we were doing it, I think as leaders, it's important that we always share the rationale behind our decisions. And we were very explicit that this was in response to the concerns that we were hearing. And the response from staff was one of tremendous gratitude. And I think they really felt that they were heard and seen and that their district leadership cared about their well-being.
Jesus, you've spoken very candidly about the investments that Clark County made, including the choice to partner with CENTEGIX. Could you talk a little bit about your experience and what made this decision the right decision for you and the district?
Yeah, no, and Susan will know she was living here in Nevada and looking at the funding. And I'll start there. When I took over the Clark County School District 6 years ago, and I'm not a current sitting superintendent here. I stepped out a few months ago. We had one emergency, and I tie emergency management because that's kind of the prevention, and that is the response, right? So I had the fifth largest district in the country, 300,000 kids, 40,000 employees, and I had one emergency management person to manage all the emergencies. When I start looking at the math, this doesn't even make sense, right? So there had been some investment that we were making in safety prevention. But as a matter of fact, when the incident that took place, a tragedy, I was getting ready to, I'd been meeting with principals around what are we going to do? Principals were coming. What are we doing to protect, whether we're doing single point of entries, we're doing perimeters, we're doing investing in more cameras, all of that. So we're reallocating dollars. I remember like it happened yesterday. I was walking into a board meeting and my deputy superintendent comes and says, "Boss, we just had an emergency we're dealing with. I got to step off." So I had to go to the school as we're closing the school. We had a tragedy of a 16-year-old that went back to campus, and I'd be very frank and open. Went back to campus to check his grades. Teacher was working in the classroom by herself, just kind of doing what teachers do, right, to make sure paperwork. Not getting into the graphics of it, but this young man had come back into school, 16-year-old, and now his life is ruined, and attacks and almost and practically try to kill a teacher. And I say all that not to scare, but it was just that incident and we had phones, we had the emergency on the wall, we had all measures. Unfortunately, right, the teacher couldn't get out. A custodian found her and called the police. The young man left and found the police. They're still going through the trials. The teacher is no longer a second-year teacher. When I went to visit her in the hospital, it was like I was seeing my kid, my 27-year-old, right? So all of this, I wish we could have done more. Unfortunately, we didn't. We had all these different measures. So CENTEGIX went and we brought in and did a pilot through an RFP process. So as a superintendent, you're now, it's how do you get measured to respond? How do you respond to this tragedy? Because everybody is not, hyped in the press. The teachers, rightfully so. So it was, to me, I set the expectations to say, we got to get it done through the RFP process, and I gave you guys 100 days. Remember that, Rocky? I gave you guys
Yes, I
100
do.
days to get it done. Once we made the selection, and I tell you, the entire community, the response from the community, the teachers, they felt like, as Dr. Enfield and Steve, Susan and Steve mentioned both, it was the empowerment that teachers now felt, and it wasn't just teachers, custodians, it was our support staff, it was our office, even in the main office, because everything, there's a lot of different, every building, every school, every employee, even the superintendent, we all had our badge, right? Because it was a response, not only, in the training. Well done, well done. Your response to mitigate our response, and our challenge was by far classy, non-intrusive. Our principals, because if you sell it to your principals, all superintendents know we sell our principals on it, and they were just feeling that not only the response but the ease of the implementation, the training. And I heard from building to building, you care, and it was finally they felt that they were empowered.
So obviously, as we kind of transition a little bit into a couple of series of questions, we've sort of talked a lot about this next question in your previous response. But if there's anything else that any of you would want to share in regards to, how emergency response systems, and I know we've all talked about different ones, whether they're app-based or wearable. Wearables are becoming more utilized in schools. Obviously, your districts made the investment to the wearable, which is, of course, what we have at CENTEGIX. And you've also kind of already talked about the level of importance, whether it's the feeling of safety of your staff or how it's made your community more unified in looking at safety measures and the investments that need to be made. Is there anything specific you want to add to your previous statements that we need to kind of highlight? Steve, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. This has greatly reduced the anxiety that our community and our staff has had, and build confidence in sending their kids to school and staff coming to school. Definitely has helped attract staff from surrounding. I know it's going to be a future question. I'll jump the gun a little bit, that it's definitely helped with that. But we had a situation where we had a staff member that hit the 9 button instead of the 3 button. Our CENTEGIX is hooked up through our police department, that all of our police officers get it on their cell phones and alert, get it on their laptops and their cruisers. Our police agency has a war room, they call it, that has cameras for all the school district's cameras that are always up. So within 25 or 30 seconds, our police department was looking at the hallway, and the police were on the way, and then I had to call them and say it was a mistake. I was worried they were going to be upset that we put this whole thing in panic. It was a real run, wasn't a drill. It ended up being an error, not a drill. They didn't know it, and they loved it now. It worked so tremendously well that it built the confidence in the community even more. But the one thing I want to add is that the largest impact we are seeing is the 3-button push in even controlling behaviors before they start. And that is where you get 2 students that are starting to get into an argument, and a staff member is able to alert administration. And our students are even laughing now that the principals are there so early that you better not do anything, because nothing's going to happen, because they get there before start fights on a regular basis. So that is the big impact, being able to not only address behaviors that are out of control, but stop behaviors before they get out of control. And that's had the largest impact in our district.
That preventative is huge. That de-escalation is a big piece of this puzzle. You want to prevent situations. You want students in classrooms, so there's the likelihood of suspensions are less. I know, Susan, you talked about that, and that was some work that you kind of laid out for your district, as well as reducing the number of suspensions and making sure that they weren't impacting student learning in that way. Anything you'd like to add to any of your previous statements around this particular area?
Yeah, I think, Rocky, I would just say that, and I think that both you and Steve just touched on it. A couple of things. First of all, uh, the fact that this wearable technology is becoming um, more utilized in school districts, I think, is a good thing. I think it speaks to the need for our district leaders to be on the forefront of the latest technologies and strategies that we can use to make sure that we are providing a high quality and safe education for all of our children. So I think that I think that piece is really important, and uh, it will no wearable technology, nothing like that, as important and critical as it is, will take the place of the relationships that teachers and staff build with students and the
Correct.
preventative measures that they take. And the reality is that when a child or young person is known and respected by the adults in their building, even when they lose their temper or something happens to trigger them, that relationship will help de-escalate that situation before it starts. So I think I want to make sure that we continue to look at safety very, very holistically. With this wearable technology that CENTEGIX provides as a critical component, but one component of a larger overall strategy.
Thank you for sharing that, because again, it's that ecosystem, right? We're one piece of a bigger puzzle that's designed to create the safest learning environments possible. Jesus, anything you want to add to your previous comments around uh, wearables, the use of wearables, why you chose a wearable, and then of course, what has been the impact? And you kind of talked a little bit about it already in your previous answer. Just want to give you a little more time to answer, to say anything else you'd want to add to that.
No, I just piggyback on what Susan just mentioned. I mean, this is a holistic view. This is a, and I learned this from our new emergency management director. He said, these are barriers, right? It's not barriers for kids, but it's you got to put safety barriers, because not one thing is going to stop. Not one, you can put the single point of entries, the cameras, all of that. These are multiple systems that you're putting into an ecosystem to protect the educators, to protect the kids. But to piggyback, I mean, we all know it's that relationship with the adults and the child and the kid, right? It's that, because kids know when you care. And I used to say this back to my principal days. I used to, if you don't care about your kids, they're not going to care about your subject.
And just, I think that it all ties in, that ability for my administrators to get there before incidents happen, allow them now to focus on relationship building and communication versus having to respond to a severe physical action.
Yep.
And that really helps build that.
We like to say every second matters here at CENTEGIX, but also every relationship matters, right? And so the ability to do that is a centerpiece and a cornerstone of creating those environments. So obviously, Steve, you mentioned this, and so I'm going to jump to you real quick about how utilizing this tool and other tools that you've invested in your district, how has that allowed for you to feel better about your ability to keep the quality teachers you have, but also recruit? Teacher shortages are a national challenge. So obviously, anything that can help you keep your valuable resource, your teachers, and also enhance your ability to recruit is going to be critical. So can you talk a little bit about how you've leveraged your safety as a part of your recruitment and retention efforts?
The fact that we were the first in the area to have CENTEGIX was definitely a discussion point amongst staff throughout the schools. Now some of the schools, Springfield, some of the other ones have also jumped on board and have I think, yes, they wanted to be safe, but the dialogue about what we were offering in the safety was something that had to be addressed by other districts. I definitely feel it's helped in retain staff. And we don't have a measure for that, but in the dialogues with our union leadership, they absolutely say that the staff feels very comfortable being here with the CENTEGIX system, and it's definitely helped.
Hey, Sue, so what about you? I know, in many of your conversations, especially with your union leadership, this was a topic, right? So can you share a little bit about your experience in relationship to, like I said, keeping that quality teacher force that you was able to attract in Clark County, but also recruit where
Mm.
you needed where there were vacancies and you needed additional personnel?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this was as a response because there was look, our folks were there was skepticism that we were going to do this because I came out, you came out for our press conference when we said we're doing this, and there was they said, well, yeah, they've always done this and never. So when we delivered with 100 days, the value of the teachers that they felt valued, and speaking of that one school where this incident happened, that was my priority, right? So to maintain teachers because the concern of the principal was that she was going to start losing and hemorrhaging teachers out. I certainly played a significant role in making sure that not only we were recruiting, but mostly in retaining our teachers in our tougher areas, right, where teachers didn't feel safe. This was something that we added as a recruiting tool to make sure that our teachers were retained in some of these buildings.
Susan, any additional insight for Washoe in particular in regards to,
Well, yeah, I
how
would
this
just
plays
say,
a role?
yeah. So I want to be clear and start by saying that the central office exists to serve schools. The district leaders at central office get up every morning with one purpose, and that is to serve and support students and staff in school buildings. And everything we do, we need to everything we do or don't do communicates a message to our staff about how much we value them. And the more very, very public steps we can take to signal that value, I think is critical. And so I know that, teachers and staff want to work in a school district where they know the leadership will listen to them and will invest in their well-being and will continue to see themselves in service to schools because that's why central offices exist.
Great point, and I think it also leads into the next question. I should say that our next question, which is, what has been the impact as it relates to the climate and culture of your schools in your district, right? So obviously, safety plays significant roles in that. Have you seen changes? Have you seen any positivity as it relates to how folks work together in whether it's the district office serving the schools and serving those who serve students, or any other areas by which there's been a shift in the cultural dynamics of your district? Uh, Susan, I'll start with you because I know you kind of leaned into that a little bit in a previous
Sure.
response.
So I don't know the actual hard data to answer that question around the shift in incidents and climate in Washoe, but I will say that the conversation and level of concern that we were hearing, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, was definitely coming down. And I have to attribute some of that to investments like this that we made in response to the concerns that we were hearing from staff, students, and families.
Thank you. Steve, how about you?
Well, a long time ago, we've all heard that parents are sending us their most precious item every day when they send their kids to our schools. So by setting a priority in their students' safety, it definitely has led to we had a positive relationship, but it strengthened a positive relationship between the district and the community. Same thing with staff. Staff, I feel the discussions, they're not feeling in isolation, which Jesus, your situation, that would have been somebody who had a moment of isolation. They're not in that anymore when you have systems like this, that it's more of a team approach. And that is definitely having a positive impact.
Thank you. Jesus, I think you've mentioned this a little bit too. Obviously, in a large district, super large district like Clark County, anything that can have a positive impact on the climate and culture is going to create shift. Can you talk a little bit about some things that you experienced?
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, similar to Susan, what Steve mentioned, but for us, it was, that the collaboration, that everybody was in it to win it, right? And you were part of it. I mean, you became part of our culture for the time, and you still are, in the district, where we were all committed to making things happen. And we had a culture there. Our principals questioned central office. So I always used to say to central office, as Susan mentioned, we have jobs because their children sit in classrooms. Period. The end. That's the only reason we have jobs. So you better get support our principals because they're in it every single day, and our educators. And so that relationship came through so well in one mission to deliver and to make sure that everybody felt safe. And then we added, and not putting a plug for something else that you bring to the table, which is a visitor management system that we added to the mix, because it was just, you became, I told him, I said, I want Rocky to have an office here in the central office because he's part of our team.
I tell you what, I almost bought a place in Vegas. I was there so much. So I definitely appreciate that plug. But partnership matters a lot to us, and obviously we take it very seriously. And our commitment to our districts is really very key to making sure that we can perform for you, and thus be that trusted advisor that you need as a partner. So I think all of you have alluded to this question in some way, shape, or form in regards to feedback that you've gotten as relates to the implementation of your safety solutions and your safety investments. Take a couple of minutes, starting with you, Jesus. Any feedback you just want to share simply that you've gotten either from board members or community staff, anyone that you'd like to share specifically around how the positive impact has made a difference?
Yeah, no, and well, the board, and I'll tell you, the board was hearing so much, the positive feedback, so much of it that they were inquiring, when are we going to get the badges, right? And I said, well, the schools go first, right? Schools go first. Everybody goes first. But you know what? The reality is, and we face that influx of negative behavior at the board meeting as well, right? Remember, that hasn't slowed down. So it was that effort, but it was very positive as to, let's get this thing done quickly. So and look, we didn't get any more money. We used some ESSER dollars, but it's now part of the budget, and now it's a priority in the budget. Where I wish I would have done it earlier and sooner. Maybe that tragedy wouldn't happen. But as an investment of the district, we reallocated resources. This is a priority, and the board pushed on me to say, not that we wouldn't have done it, or very supportive when the budget was coming, some of the things that we're looking at in the measures, because when you go to schools, when you go visit, everything was very positive about not only the implementation, but the level of security that the teachers, staff, and educators felt. Support staff, so well received. They felt like they were part of the team. In so many cases, they feel like they're the last stand. And I said, okay, we value you as well. So it was very positive, the implementation, and it's still going on.
Susan, can you go to a little bit of insight that you've gained from some of your stakeholders and how they view these investments?
Well, I think, as I said, gratitude and a feeling of being heard, and that the district cared about their well-being. That was a pretty strong theme. The one thing that I'll end on, though, Rocky, is that with any large-scale implementation of anything, there will be bumps. And we all know as human beings how much everybody loves to embrace change at the outset. And so whenever we're introducing something new at scale in a district, there will always be challenges, and there will always be some who resist because it's new or it's hard. And what I say to folks is this: Here's the education equation as I see it. To do right by our children, we as the adults will make our lives harder. And I'll say it again for those in the back. To do right by our children, we as the adults in school systems will make our lives harder. And that means we need to continue to push. We need to continue to innovate. We need to continue to seek out new and better ways to educate our children and support our staff, and make sure that the technologies and investments that we make in them really matter and have a positive impact on our students and staff.
Thank you. And Steve, I know you kind
I'm
of
sorry.
alluded to things.
I was writing that down because I might use that on opening day.
It's all yours, Steve.
Yeah, okay. I think one of the things you got to look at is when we're talking about the finance part of it, the ROI, the return on investment that you get. I think right now that if we were to discuss canceling CENTEGIX, the uproar from that itself would prove that our return on investment is absolutely worth it.
Yep.
Because it's not something you could remove without people having a tremendous sense of loss.
Right.
And that makes it worth it.
Yep.
Well, I don't know if I can say anything beyond that. So I'm going to move on to our last question that I have. And then there are some questions from the audience that we'll get to. But I'll just simply leave as my last question. As either a sitting or former superintendent, obviously even the former superintendents are still working with your peers. What advice would you give to them if someone came to you right now and just simply asked for your opinion or advice? What would you say to them in how they are thinking about those safer learning environments, and how you would, what you would propose that they think about in their roles as superintendents? Steve, I'm going to start with you, then I'm going to go to Susan, and then I'm going to finish up with Jesus.
We all have limited funds. You need to ensure that your investment of those funds are going to have an impact and are going to have a positive impact. You need to do your research. You need to talk to schools that have invested money in similar types of security measures. There's a lot of ways to waste money out there. So you need to really examine the situation and make sure you've got that positive ROI on your investment with your limited funds.
Susan.
I will put a check mark next to that, Steve. I think being mission driven in your spending is critical. And there are things that require no money, but simply collective will. And that really comes down to the relationships that we cultivate between our schools and our districts, between adults and children within a building, adults and adults within a building, and children. So doubling down on creating an environments where those relationships can thrive is as essential as the investments we make in systems like CENTEGIX.
Jesus.
So I'm going to double check both Steve and Susan, but also I'm going to add to, and I'm going to say that it's when you think about the challenges that school superintendents are facing today, we're not getting any more money. But now you're making decisions with a curriculum instruction or teaching and learning and safety, right? It's tough, right? It goes back to why you have to make sure that you research and have an ROI, and what are you doing that's going to help. So the advice is that make sure there's research base, and the relationships are critical with adults, with kids, but then also with somebody that is not with a reputable organization, a company that is going to deliver. I knew that coming in. Rocky, you and we've known each other for years, over 10 years. And I knew that if things weren't going to go, I knew who to call, and you were going to be there to respond, to make sure that you were going to make sure that what I was going to deliver on, Mike, for my community, you were in it with me. It wasn't just about a picture. So I think the relationships, both with the schools, with the kids, but then also with who you do business with, are critically important.
Well, thank you all so much. We do have a few questions in the chat that I want to get to. We're over our time, but we can go for another few minutes. So I definitely want to get to the questions from the audience at this time. So we've got one that talks about the role of community-based programs, nonprofits supporting school safety, and how can they be integrated? Do you see a role? Does anyone want to take a stab at that question?
I'll start. I think particularly in districts that are richly diverse, as some of the systems that I've led are, you simply have to partner with your community-based organizations and your families to make sure that the culture that you're building within your district is respectful of and representative of all of the children and families that you're serving. And so a district, I don't think, can do that in isolation from community.
Yep.
Steve, I think I'm going to go to you for this one because this one is very specific. It said, would you recommend this safety network for a small rural school district? For example, the district I live and work has one high school, two elementary schools, one being a TK or TK through 8. So, Steve, can you kind of speak to that one a little bit?
We have one rural elementary school that is about 14, 15 miles out of town, and it only has county police service. There is a local police, but sometimes they're not working. So that's the main source, is the county. I actually think that it's equally as valuable, if not more valuable, for that situation to be able to have as early of an alert system as possible. That's on the big alert and the big threat. But when you start talking about just the 3-button push and getting administrators there early to be able to react before any type of behaviors are exhibited, that's going to be beneficial in any school, no matter what size. When it talks about building the confidence in your community and your staff, that's going to be beneficial in any size. Prior to coming to Jacksonville, I was in a very small Illinois district. And if CENTEGIX would have been around, I absolutely would be advocating for it in that district.
Rocky, if I can just chime in on that as well, because my rural community in Moapa, Mesquite, Laughlin, they wanted to make sure that I didn't forget about them and say, I hope we're getting the same thing as our city schools were getting. It's important.
Great point. There's a question that talks about have parents and families been activated? I think we mentioned that in some of our questions or our responses, and engaged to learn from and inform school safety strategic plans. I think we talked about that in the strategic plan question, but if either of you want to give additional context to how parents and others have played a role in the development of those strategic plans and those safety portions of that strategic plan.
Yeah, we had and I can just go briefly. We did part of our school improvement plan, but also our district strategic plan. Our community was involved in the creation, the validation, setting goals, and actually they started doing that refreshing as well. Intimately involved.
One question that came in, I definitely want to get to. It says, "Can Susan repeat that important statement one more time that Steve was writing down?"
Yes, I can.
I have it if you don't.
The education equation, as said by Susan Enfield, in order to do right by our children, we as the adults in schools will make our lives harder. Because if we're comfortable, if we're only doing that which we know how to do, we're not pushing ourselves to meet the various needs of each and every one of the children that we're privileged to serve every day. So we need to push ourselves. We need to try new things. We need to take some courageous but smart risks and investments to do right by our children. They're counting on us. Happy new school year, everybody.
Well, that's what I call a mic drop. We did have one additional question that did ask about elementary level response to the system. And so if anybody wants to give a quick response to how elementary schools have been impacted, it would be great as a closeout question.
It's definitely had a large impact. The same as it does with high school. Behaviors that potentially could lead to aggressive behaviors with disciplinary response still happen. but definitely in some of our areas with our special education classrooms, where being able to get that early understanding that there's a brewing event to get people there earlier has had a dramatically positive impact.
Well, that does provide some context as relates to, and I think Dr. Jara, Jesus mentioned this, all means all. So everyone has to be a part of this process from start to finish, and the earlier you can engage, the better. Obviously, want to make sure that we thank all of you for your attendance, for staying over a few minutes, because we were a little bit over time, but we definitely appreciate all of you hanging in with us. We think it was a very quality conversation. We appreciate our panelists. Want to give them one last piece for them to be able to close us out in any way they feel necessary. I'm going to start, ladies first. I'm going to start with Susan. Any closing remarks?
As I said earlier, I just wish everybody a safe, happy, healthy school year.
Steve.
That's enough. Same.
And Hasty.
Sam, have a great year.
Thanks, EdWeb, for hosting us. We definitely appreciate it. This does conclude our webinar for today. And thank you all very much for attending. We greatly appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.